Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Midweek Message. I am just going to pull up what I wrote. So this week, uh, yeah, this week, sorry, got it there, just got it. We are talking about the wise man and the foolish man building their houses. But one of the things that I want that we are also reading from is Romans 3:21 to 31. So I thought that we'd focus on that for the midweek message this week. So I'm going to read you parts of it, just a little bit, so just to give you an idea of where Paul is going in his letter. It's called God Has Set Things Right, and this is from the Message translation. But in our time, something new has been added. What Moses and the prophets witnessed to all those years ago has happened. The God setting things right, his restorative justice that we read about, has become Jesus setting things right for us. And not only for us, but for everyone who believes in him with no partiality. For there's no difference between us and them in this. Since we've compiled this long and sorry record as sinners, both us and them, and proved that we are utterly incapable of living the glorious lives God wills for us, God did it for us. Out of sheer generosity, he put us in right standing with himself, a pure gift of grace. He got us out of this mess we're in and restored us to where he always wanted us to be. And he did this by means of Jesus the Christ. So, what we've learned is this: God does not respond to what we do, we respond to what God does. We finally figured it out. Our lives get in step with God and all others. And this is the important part, by letting him set the pace, not by proudly or anxiously trying to run the parade. Is God the God of Israel only? If he created all things, then doesn't that make him the God of all people, says Paul. And of course, he's right. Yes, he is also the God of all the outsiders. So, where does that leave our proud claim of having the corner on God? Also canceled. God is the God of all. How could it be otherwise, since there is only one God? God sets right all who welcome his action and enter into it. I'm going to say that one again. God sets right all who welcome his action and enter into it. That's a two-part thing. That is the way of faith, both those who follow our religious system and those who have never heard of it. So we are not, so are we trying to use faith to abolish the law? Absolutely not. In fact, we now are free to uphold the law as God intended. By shifting our focus from what we do to what God does, what happens, in fact, is that by putting that entire way of life in its proper place, we confirm it. So that's several of the verses from Romans. And here's what I want us to think about. Number one, God, so I'm pulling out some key sentences from that. One of them is God does not respond to what we do. We respond to what God does. In our understanding of our purpose and our spiritual walk, do we actually do that? I hope we do. It's food for thought, and it's something we need to think about and pray about and continue to act on. Number two, our lives get in step with God and all others by letting God set the pace, not by proudly or anxiously trying to run the parade, which is just a beautiful translation of that. So this reinforces Paul's first ideas that we in our modern world tend to dismiss or ignore because we want to set the pace. We tend to set the pace. We don't think anybody or anything else should. So, what would our lives and our church community look like if we listened to God's pace, if we listened to God's purpose? How might that change us? Number three, Paul says, God is the God of all. Well, I mean, that one might seem obvious and self explanatory, but the agenda that we know God asks of us over and over in both the Old and New Testaments is right there: feed the hungry, clothe the naked, take care of the widow and the orphan, visit those in prison. Those are said over and over. So they actually have a moniker in, like in seminary, you learn that that's called the preferential option for the poor. That kind of hospitality and compassionate care, that kind of life of sharing is what we're actually called to do for all, for everyone. God is the God of all. So when we are called to live the way God asks us to live, that preferential option for the poor, we need to offer it to everyone. Might seem obvious, but that us and that attitude is it's hard to kick. So, number 4, another sentence from that little passage in Romans, God sets right all who welcome his action and enter into it. All who welcome his action, that's one, welcoming it, and then entering into it, the action part. So God sets us right. When we welcome God's action in the world and become a part of it, again, God is calling us to be faithful, but faithful action. And so we don't worry about successful, we worry about faithful, faithful action. God takes care of that part. I believe that when we actively take part in the faithful part, God's action. Because again, if we're seeing this as God's parade and not ours, God setting the agenda, not us, that really changes things. So, number 5, Paul says, we now are free to uphold the law as God intended. By shifting our focus from what we do to what God does, what happens is that by putting that entire way of life in its proper place, we confirm it. So that's what Paul is saying. And that is the culmination of our passage, the entire way of life that is set at God's pace with God's agenda and God's care for our world for everybody. That is our proper life. And we confirm God's work in the world by listening and discerning God's will and work of compassion and creativity and genius creativity, not by setting the agenda ourselves. So we actively enter into that from what we do to what God does, and then we extend that to everyone. So, my question to you today is, do we start there by listening for God in prayer, by interpreting scripture and action in the world together as a faithful community in faith? Do we actually allow God to work? And if you say yes, or if you say, yes, I'd really like to, but I'm not really sure, how do we do this? Well, we start with basic things that are really profound in changing how we see ourselves and how we act. And that starts as with prayer, both as individuals and as a community. That is so, so, so important. And teaching, we have it like right here, the teaching from our scriptures. A close reading like this helps us to understand how to approach God as well as our lives. So that's why we do those close readings of scripture. And it's why we look at the original language and the original culture and political setting. And we look at those things so that we can best understand what is being said. And then it's got to become action. It's not just sitting around talking about it, which I know we do really well at church, but it's got to become action as a community and as individuals. Our prayer and teaching flows out of our hands and our feet, and we participate in God's life in this way. And we reflect God's values and narrative for our world through action. This is why our community matters to the larger community. And it really, truly does. We make a difference when we prayerfully participate in a faithful and redemptive life of service to others. When we interpret and discern together, when we hold each other accountable in our life of faith, and that's why it is so important to be in a community of faith because we hold each other accountable and we are able to do more together. And we don't sort of wander off and get lost because we hold each other together and we hold the wisdom of the body. So it's not just us going off on our own. It makes a huge difference. And it's a saving and compassionate difference for the people around us because it means a radical welcome, radical hospitality and service for the people around us and love. Love makes a difference. Listening to love makes a difference. And we believe that God is love, so we listen to our God of love in faith. All right, that's it for this week. I'm going to go back. Romans 3, let me see, sorry. Romans 3, 21 to 31. Grab that Bible, read it, do a close read. Look at what is being asked of you there. And know that you're never doing it alone. You're always doing it with God, who is love, and you're always doing it with the community. We hold each other accountable, but we also hold each other up and we encourage each other and we do more together than we can do by ourselves. So, in this together with you as always. And I'll see you on Sunday. This is Reverend Stephanie signing off.